everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Patrick Finnegan, producer of ARE Live here at Black Spectacles, and I'm joined with architect Chris Hopstock, who's going to review several project planning and design mock exam questions. We're going to go through questions that cover PPD knowledge and skills related to evaluating site topography and its impact on design decisions, incorporating stormwater management and grading in site planning, integrating structural systems based on program and form, evaluating structural systems relative to spatial requirements and function, and applying code and program requirements to unit layouts. If you're joining Black Spectacles for the first time, Black Spectacles is a leader in ARE prep. We work with learning scientists and architects to ensure you're studying the right content and that you retain it so you can pass on your first try. We've built everything you need to pass the exams, including new video lectures with motion graphics and 3D animation, practice exams that are as close to the real thing as you can get, flashcards, quizzes, and virtual workshops. And they're all built upon a curriculum that ensures you're learning the right content, and they all work together with our custom-built platform to ensure that you retain the information so you remember it for the exams. It's why our pass rates are 50% higher than the national average, and why our members report passing in half the time of the national average. Over on our Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook social channels, we post daily mock exam questions. So if you don't already follow us, I suggest that you do. We're at black.spectacles on Instagram and TikTok, and just Black Spectacles on Facebook. Our next ARE Live is going to be on July 23rd, where we'll be covering a PJM mock exam. You can go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to sign up, and you'll also receive an email after this with a link to join the next session. I want to introduce two of our referral programs that we have. We offer a referral program for firms and schools where if you introduce us to your boss or HR, and if they sign up, we'll give you a $250 gift card. To participate, follow the instructions on blackspectacles.com/group-referral. And we also offer a refer a friend program where you can sign up to receive a customized discount code to save your friend 15% off any membership. And you'll receive a $50 gift card of your choice when they redeem. You can go to blackspectacles.com/referral to participate. Today, we're going to be engaging exclusively on our online ARE community. So head over to community.blackspectacles.com, and right at the top, you'll see we've pinned a thread called ARE Live PPD Mock Exam June 2025. And if you have any questions as we're going through ARE Live today, you can post your questions there and we'll answer them live as we get to them. And everyone who posts in that thread today will be eligible to win a free Black Spectacles t-shirt. Literally, all you have to do is go over to community.blackspectacles.com and say hi, and you're registered. And of course, don't forget to stay tuned until the end of the episode to see if you won. And our community isn't just for ARE Live questions. In fact, we just launched a new podcast called Licensure Stories, which you can find on our ARE community YouTube channel or your favorite podcasting service, where our founder interviews recently licensed architects to learn about their struggles and successes so you can learn how they did it. You can check out Licensure Stories on our ARE community or YouTube channel. And with that, I'd like to welcome today's guest, Chris Hopstock. In addition to working with us here at Black Spectacles, Chris is an architect based in New York. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for the intro, Patrick. I'm excited to be talking about PPD today. I think of the three technical divisions on the ARE, PA, PPD, and PDD. I think this one, PPD, is kind of the most mysterious. I think for PA, planning and programming and analysis, it's pretty clear. You're talking about what you're doing in the beginning of a project, laying out all of the requirements, programming the project. And similarly for PDD, you're answering questions about what you do towards the end of the project when you're preparing contract documents and getting ready for the building department to review your project. But this exam, PPD, is just what's in the middle. It's all the design stuff that we do between those two phases. And for that reason, I think it's kind of a mixed bag and a little bit of a challenge to study for. So some of the questions today that we're going to go over reflect that, what I just talked about. And let's get into it with question one. All right, refer to the exhibit. An architect is determining suitable locations for a proposed recreation center on a hilly site. The owner has provided a topographical survey with contour intervals at 10 feet. Along which property line does the property have the most total slope? A, the north property line, B, the east property line, C, the south property line, or D, the west property line. So something you'll see on the PPD exam and also on the PA exam is questions about how to read a survey. You'll need to be able to do this to understand how the land slopes on a site so that you can consider where you want to place your building, and also other site features like the driveway in, a parking lot, or any accessory buildings that you might be placing. On this particular survey, the site is basically a rectangle and it's rotated slightly. You can see the north arrow on the right. North is usually pointing up on a survey, but I wouldn't take that for granted. Look for the north arrow. It's particularly important for this question because the answer choices all refer to cardinal directions. There's a couple of different numbers on this survey. You can see the bearing angles, the lot line dimensions, and the contour line elevation markers. Only the elevation markers are required to answer this particular question, which is asking you again, which lot line has the most total slope. You can see, however, that the north and south property lines have the same bearing angle and the same length, and you can say the same thing about the east and west property lines. That is an indication that this site is pretty rectangular, which you can also see just kind of by looking at it. So back to the contour lines, these curvy lines on the survey, they all connect various points that have the same elevation, the elevation that's noted next to the line. You can kind of think about the chipboard models that you created back in architecture school. Each piece of chipboard is cut along a contour line, and when you stack them, they create a slope. This is kind of a 2D representation of that same idea. So here we can see that the leftmost contour line on this survey is at plus 90 feet, and the rightmost contour line is at plus 40 feet. So the site in general slopes from left being the highest to the right being the lowest by 50 feet. Since this question is asking us which property line has the most slope, we can look at the slope on one side of each property line, then the slope on the other side of the property line, do some subtraction, and find the total slope. Luckily here, each corner of the property line has a contour line that goes right through it, so we're not going to have to do any interpolation or guesswork about exactly where the property line corner falls. So let's just start with choice A and work our way through. So choice A, the north property line, we've got 90 feet on the left side and 50 feet on the right side, so we've got a difference of 40 total feet. The east property line is actually just sloping from 50 feet at the top to 50 feet at the bottom, so it's essentially got no slope, but there is a section of the 40-foot contour line that goes through it. So if you think about what that lot line looks like, it's kind of like a smiley face shape. There's a little bit of a ditch in the center. So that has less slope than the north property line, so that one's incorrect. The south property line, we're going from contour line 80 down to contour line 50, so we've got a 30-foot difference there, but still not more than the north property line. And finally, the west property line, we're going from 80 on the northern side, from 90 on the northern side to 80 on the southern side for a 10-foot difference. So for all of these four property lines, the north lot line has the steepest slope of 40 total feet. And Patrick, you can move on to the answer slide. And here you can just see a little visualization of the contour lines that you can do by charting and the elevation. So in this diagram, I just rotated the site plan so that the north property line is horizontal. And then I charted each contour line up to a chart that has horizontal lines for each elevation. If you simply connect those lines, you can get an idea of what the slope looks like. So this diagram is showing you what that slope looks like on the north property line. You could do this at any point through the site if you wanted to draw a site section, while you're at work or designing a project. You could certainly do this type of an exercise. I will say that for the purpose of this question on the ARE, it's totally unnecessary. You can just do the math that we went over a few minutes ago and get the answer quickly. I just wanted to sort of visualize what this property line looks like and explain another thing that you could do with topography to understand it better. So with that said, we can move on to question 2.
Okay, I don't see any questions right now so far in our community, but if you have any questions during today's session, you can go to community.blackspectacles.com and you can drop them in our thread called ARE Live PPD Mock Exam June 2025, and I'll go ahead and bring them up to Chris once we finish the question. Thanks.
Perfect. All right, question 2. Refer to the exhibit. The architect is working with their civil engineer to determine stormwater management provisions that will be required. The architect has determined that, due to zoning constrictions, the building must be placed in the center of the site. On which sides of the building will swales need to be placed? Check the two that apply. A, east, B, west, C, north, D, south, E, northwest, or F, southeast. So here we're looking at the same exact image that we were looking at in the first question, but we are being asked a different question. I saw a post about this on the NCARB community recently, asking if some questions are duplicates on the exam, and I think this is what might have happened. The same exhibit was used on multiple questions, and at a quick glance, it looks like it might be the same question. I also noticed in reviewing NCARB's demo exams that they recycle exhibits sort of often, so be on the lookout for this and don't let it throw you off. Don't just look at it quickly and assume it's the same question. It probably is not. It's actually probably useful to you when you're taking the exam if they're recycling exhibits, because you only have to understand an exhibit once and maybe you'll see a few different questions about it. It's kind of like a mini case study if you think about it that way. So back to this question, we know from studying the survey that the land is sloping from the left or the west to the right or the east. So according to this question, we're going to be placing a building in the middle of the site because of zoning constraints. That's likely a front, rear, and side yards. So just imagine a rectangle being placed in the middle of this site plan here. So if we're placing a building in the middle of this site, what does that mean for stormwater? Well, if you put a building on a sloping site and you don't do any site work to help divert water around it, you're going to have a bunch of water running into the uphill side of the building. This is bad because that water has to go somewhere, meaning it's probably going to sit against the uphill side of the building and slowly filter into the soil around the foundation wall. This can definitely lead to some wet conditions inside your basement. It can lead to water drive through the foundation and a whole host of issues that we want to mitigate through proper site design. So to solve that, we can add swales around the building that are going to help divert stormwater from the uphill side around the building and downhill. A swale, if you don't know, creates a shallow trench that's perpendicular to the contour lines that helps to divert this stormwater around a building. So let's move on to the next slide. Here's an image of what the swales would look like for this type of a building and this type of a site given its topography. So these channels funnel the water that's coming downhill. They funnel it around the sides of the building rather than allowing it to come into, in this case, the western building wall, the uphill wall. And this is a great way of dealing with stormwater management on a hilly site. So in this diagram, we can see that the swales are placed on the north and the south sides of the building because they're perpendicular to the topography lines, and that means the correct answers are C and D. If we were to put the swales on the east and west sides, we'd really just be creating ditches where the stormwater would sit, and that would essentially do us no good. We'd be creating little ponds. So the swales in this diagram connect to lower lying land near the 40-foot contour line and beyond. So the stormwater is just going to be diverted around the building and create a nice building pad for this building in the center of the site. If we don't have any questions on that one, we can move on to question 3.
Yeah, we're good to roll on to question number 3. Thanks.
Yeah, let's do it. So question 3, an architect is designing a new pavilion that will utilize light wood framing. After discussing the program with the client, the architect understands that the client has the following vision for the main meeting space: 24 feet wide by 35 feet long, 8-foot tall sidewalls with gable end walls from 8 feet to 16 feet tall, and a gable roof with a cathedral ceiling. Which of the following framing features could be proposed to accommodate the design? Check the two that apply. A, rafter ties, B, collar ties, C, a ridge board, D, a ridge beam, E, scissor trusses, or F, king post trusses. So this question requires you to picture what the design intent of the space is, understand the challenges of that design intent, understand what each option presented is and what it looks like, and finally to determine which of those options are appropriate given the design intent and the challenges of that design intent. So a lot of synthesis here, but it's a pretty classic thing that architects have to do in our day-to-day jobs. So this space is a large rectangle with a gable roof, and the client wants a cathedral ceiling, meaning that the ceiling plane within the room is pitched, not flat. In typical roof framing, and Patrick, you can move on to the next slide now. In typical roof framing with ceiling with ceiling joists, the ceiling joists create a flat ceiling in the room, and they're actually helping to keep the tops of the walls from bowing outward under the weight of the roof rafters, which are the diagonal members shown in each diagram. If you look at the diagram here labeled ridge board on the upper right, you can see what ceiling joists typically look like. They're the horizontal member there, sort of between the roof and the room. With the cathedral ceiling, however, we can't have ceiling joists. Remember, we want a pitched ceiling similar to what we see in the diagram in the lower left. So we need to keep the walls from bowing out in some other way with some other structural method. So that's the design challenge here and sort of the program that the client's looking for. So now that we understand that, let's go over each option and decide if it meets our needs. So choice A here in the upper left, rafter ties. Rafter ties are essentially ceiling joists. They're just allowed to be raised up slightly by up to 1/3 of the roof height, because if you raise them slightly, they still act just like ceiling joists do. They prevent the upper part of the walls from bowing out under the weight of the roof rafters. So these do meet the structural requirements of this type of a design, but they don't allow for a cathedral ceiling. It's really just a slightly raised ceiling with sloping portions around the room, and it's not what the client desires. It's not going to meet the programmatic requirements, therefore it's not a correct answer here. Collar ties are the next option. These are often confused with rafter ties, but they are different. Collar ties are located at the upper third of the roof height, whereas rafter ties are at the lower third. But they serve a very different purpose. These members are actually used to prevent uplift on the roof. So they basically are there to keep the diagonal rafters from pulling away from the ridge. They don't work for this programmatic situation because this roof would still need something to prevent those sidewalls from bowing out. And they also don't provide a true cathedral ceiling because there's a flat portion in the center of that ceiling. So that's going to be an incorrect answer here. Moving on to the third choice, which is ridge board. A ridge board is a really common way of supporting a ridge, but as you can see in this diagram, it needs to be used with either rafter ties or ceiling joists, which is what's shown here. Since it can't be used alone because the sidewalls will bow out like we've been talking about. So since using either rafter ties or ceiling joists won't meet our programmatic requirements, that's incorrect as well. This is just going to allow for an 8-foot ceiling in that room, which is not what the client is looking for. So moving on to our next option in the lower left here, which is a ridge beam. A ridge beam can be used instead of a ridge board when you're designing a cathedral ceiling. Ridge beams are much heavier than ridge boards. A ridge board might just be a single 2x12 member, and it's really just there to give the roof rafters something to frame into. It's not really a structural element, whereas a ridge beam is going to be much heftier. Here you might use a few large LVLs or even micro lambs to span the 35-foot length of this building. This beam supports the tops of the roof rafters and it bears on the end of each gable wall. So in this diagram, if you were to imagine the wall at the end of this section, there would be a post in that wall that's carrying one end of the ridge beam, and behind where we're cutting this section, another post similarly carrying the other end. So this certainly is an option to meet our programmatic elements and to support this roof. So ridge beam is going to be correct. Moving on to the next choice, scissor trusses. Let's just go back to that diagram for 1 second. Scissor trusses, which is the bottom row here in the center, these are another good option, and they're the second correct answer to this question. They can span pretty large distances, and as you can see in the drawing, they have sloped bottom chords, which creates a vaulted ceiling. That's what we're looking for here. It's not the same pitch as the actual roof, but that wasn't a requirement that was stated in this question. It's still a vaulted ceiling, so a totally viable option here to span this building, the 16-foot wide building, and give us the architectural aesthetic that we're looking for. And finally, king post truss. This one's incorrect because a king post truss, as you can see here, creates a flat ceiling plane, in this case at 8 feet tall. And while it is a viable structural option here, it doesn't meet the architectural design intent for this project and is therefore incorrect. We can just go on to that. Yep. So just to summarize here, D and E, ridge beam and scissor trusses are good ways to support this gable roof with a cathedral ceiling. All of the other options either can't be used by themselves, or they're going to result in not achieving the design intent that we're looking for, which is a ceiling inside the room that matches similar pitch to the roof itself. All right, we can move on to question 4 if there's no questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Looking like no questions, but if anything pops in your mind, feel free to drop them in our community, and then we can come back to this question too if you have any questions. But let's roll on to number 4.
Sounds good. Okay, question 4. An architect is working with their structural engineer to determine the most appropriate structural system for an addition to a middle school. The addition will feature a variety of different programmatic elements, including small classrooms, lab space, administrative offices, and a small gymnasium. The architect's preliminary design suggests that a regular column grid will not work well with the design intent of the space. Which of the following structural systems might be most appropriate? Check the 2 that apply. A, heavy timber, B, cast in place concrete flat slab, C, structural steel framing, D, light gauge steel, E, precast concrete hollow core slabs, or F, light wood framing. So a pretty common question type that really can take many forms. You're given a few considerations here and you're asked to choose the best structural system. This kind of question could ask you to choose the best HVAC system or the best building assembly given some constraints. So I'd say it's a question type that you really need to practice. Reading these scenarios, highlighting the operative words in the scenario, and then choosing the system that meets those requirements based on your knowledge of each system. So here we have a variety of programmatic elements that are described in the question. We've got different sizes, and we're explicitly told that a regular column grid won't work with the preliminary design that we've come up with. Just want to point out, make sure that you read carefully this sentence here says, the architect's preliminary design suggests that a regular column grid, and then on the next line it says will not work. So if you just kind of scan this, you might miss the will not work part. Just read regular column grid and select some choices that are great for a regular column grid, which would be incorrect. So I know you only have like 2.5 minutes per question and you've got to kind of read quickly, but make sure you're reading the entire question here and not skipping things as you move from line to line. Back to the question, we also know that we're designing in addition to a middle school, so we want to choose a structural system that's appropriate for that building typology, a commercial type of building that's going to be more robust than, say, a residential building that might use some lighter structural systems. So let's go through the choices. Choice A, heavy timber, uses large wood posts and beams to support a structure. It's really best when you can use a regular structural grid, like in, say, a commercial office building or something like that, or maybe even an industrial building. If you have irregularly placed columns or posts with a heavy timber structure, you're going to need some unique joints at each post to beam connection, and heavy timber just doesn't lend itself to having different types of joints at every type of connection like that. It's much better if you can just lay out a regular, say, 20 by 25 grid and use the same types of members in each location. So it's not going to work very well for this particular situation. Moving on, cast in place concrete flat slab, which is choice B. That type of a structural system really thrives in the situation that we're describing here. Column placement is super flexible with this type of a structural system, does not need to follow a grid, and it can achieve relatively large spans, certainly large enough for classrooms and a small gymnasium that you might find in a middle school. If we were talking about a full-blown, basketball court for a high school or something like that, you might need to use something different, but that's going to allow you to do that with column-free space. But for a small gym that might just be used for yoga or something like that that doesn't require as much space, cast in place concrete can totally do the job. So B is going to be correct here. Structural steel, choice C, is another good choice. Just like concrete flat slab, with structural steel, your column placement is pretty flexible. Steel connections are a lot easier to manipulate and design than the heavy timber connections. You can achieve the types of spans that we're looking for in this type of building. So structural steel is a great option here. It will require some fireproofing, whereas the cast in place concrete won't. It's fireproof by itself, but That's not a requirement that we're talking about here. So C is a good option. On the area, you'd be done because we're just looking for 2 correct choices here and we've found them, but I'll go ahead and explain the last 3 choices and talk about why they're incorrect. So light gauge steel framing and that's choice D, and then choice F, light wood framing. They're both not ideal choices here for pretty similar reasons. They can't achieve the spans we're looking for. And, any type of gymnasium is not going to work with those 2 structural systems, and they really perform better with a regular sort of structural grid where the walls can be designed as bearing walls maybe, and we've got pretty common spans across the ceiling and floor systems. And finally, choice E, precast concrete. It's not going to work very well with an irregular grid. You certainly could do it, but it's just not really efficient for this type of a project. It's best to use for projects like hotels or multifamily residential or other similar typologies where you're going to have pretty regular spans of the precast hollow pieces. If you think about those types of buildings, you probably have a center corridor that's double loaded, and you've got similar spans from one side of that center corridor to the exterior walls, and it can be standardized pretty easily for efficiency. So I guess to summarize here, whenever you're thinking of irregular column grids and just sort of a variety of different sizes of spaces, and a project like this, a middle school that's going to have a little bit of a long span type of a situation, you want to think about some cast in place concrete flat slab or structural steel framing. All right, and we can move on to question 5.
Thanks, Chris. Let's actually roll back to number 3. We just have one question around, I think we bring up the diagram, but I just got one question around number 3. And this is, can the king post just be at the end of the wall and the rest of the ceiling be cathedral?
That's a good question. So if you were to combine it with a ridge beam, yes, I mean, I guess you could put a king post in what are called the gable end walls on the 2 ends of this building. But it wouldn't be necessary, I would say. You can just support the ridge beam with a post in the end of the wall. So you could also do some heavy timber designs might have these king post trusses spaced pretty widely, let's say at 4 feet on center, or maybe even a little bit wider with a ridge beam in between. You could do something like that, but so those work structurally, but they wouldn't achieve the design intent of this project, which is a cathedral ceiling with nothing taking up any ceiling space for structural requirements.
Gotcha. Thanks. Yeah. And then with that, let's go to number 5.
All right, so an architect is designing the kitchens at a multifamily residential building during the early stages of the design process. The architect hopes to incorporate linear kitchens in each studio apartment. According to the client's requirements and the architect's code research, the following is required to be provided in each kitchen: a 24-inch refrigerator, a 30-inch sink cabinet, a 30-inch range with a hood, a work surface, and a standard dishwasher. What is the minimum length required for each kitchen? A, 12 feet, B, 11 feet 6 inches, C, 11 feet, or D, 9 feet. All right, so this is a pretty common exercise that you might encounter early in a design phase. You're laying out some apartments in a multifamily project. You need to quickly estimate the size of a kitchen, but you don't want to fully design this kitchen at this stage of the project. You're just kind of like working on unit layouts, figuring out maybe the depth of the apartments that you want and maybe the widths of rooms. So you just need kind of a rule of thumb about how big is this kitchen going to be. You put it in as a placeholder for now at the right size, and then you can detail it later on in the DD or CD phase. So pretty common exercise you might be doing early on in a project. This question says we're using linear kitchens, meaning that we're going to place each required item just in a line next to each other. Unlike an L-shaped kitchen or a U-shaped kitchen, this is just a straight kitchen that you might find in pretty commonly in a studio apartment or an efficiency unit. We've got the dimensions of some items, the first 3 items listed here, but not all. The work surface is missing, as is the size of the standard dishwasher. So we need to know what the sizes of those things are, and then we can simply add these up and figure out the length of the kitchen. So work surfaces are required under ANSI A 117.1 as well as the ADA guidelines for accessible design. ANSI says that required work surfaces have to be 30 inches minimum in width. The same requirement can be found in the ADA guidelines for accessible design in section 804.3. So we've got 30 inches for our work surface. The second piece of information you need to bring to the table here to answer this question is, what is a standard dishwasher? Well, standard dishwashers are 24 inches wide. The only other size that I'm really that I know of for a dishwasher is 18 inches wide. Those are the two sizes, but a standard dishwasher is 24 inches wide. So that's something you should know. And now with that, we have the size of each item that we need to fit in this kitchen. We can simply add them all up. I would say the easiest thing to do that is to use the calculator when you're taking the ARE and add up all of these in inches and then simply divide by 12 at the end to get your answer. So if you go about it that way, you're going to add 24, 30, 30, 30, and then 24 again, which is going to give you 138. If you divide that by 12, you're going to get 11.5, which is the same as 11 foot 6 inches. So that's answer B, and that's the correct answer here. You could possibly do this in your head as well if you're used to converting between feet and inches. I think if you do a lot of interior design or cabinetry work, you might have sort of committed to memory that 24 inches is 2 feet and 30 inches is 2.5 feet. You might have some others memorized as well. 80 inches is 6'8". That's a pretty common door height or minimum height for egress requirements. So if you're comfortable doing it that way, you can kind of just add up 2 plus 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, that's 7.5, and then another 2 gets you 11.5. It's really up to you. Whichever way you do it, I would practice answering these math questions that might require you to convert from feet to inches or inches to feet. Practice doing them a little bit and decide on your methodology when you want to take the ARE. What you don't want to do is figure out on test day which way you're going to solve this. Just have a method pre-planned and use that method. So with that, that's the end of my explanations. Do we have any other questions, Patrick?
Yeah, I got a couple questions just kind of around the dishwasher on this one, and then just one more on the I think on question number 3. But I'm just going to roll through a couple of these for question number 5. The first one is, can the work surface exist on top of the dishwasher? And then another one's kind of off of that too. It's like, can't the standard work surface be above the dishwasher?
So the work surface needs to be able to have knee and toe clearance beneath it so that somebody in a wheelchair can approach it from a front approach. So if you think about it, if you're mobility impaired and you want to, let's say, chop some vegetables in the kitchen, it's great to have a space that you can pull into, like you would sit under a table and be close to what you're cutting or whatever you're doing in the kitchen to be able to use that space well. So this work surface needs to be in an area that has nothing permanent underneath it. If there's a dishwasher underneath it, well, if a mobility impaired person moves into that apartment, where are they going to move the dishwasher in order to use that work surface? It just doesn't work. So it can't be there. I do believe if you have a 36-inch sink cabinet, which is not what we have here, you can put just a 2 foot, so a 24-inch work surface next to it. That gives you a total of 5 feet with the sink and the work surface. I think you're allowed to do that to save some space, but that's not the situation that we have here with just the 30-inch sink cabinet.
Gotcha. And then one kind of going off of just space around it too. This is Anna who's asking, don't you need extra space in between all the appliances too? And I guess that kind of rolls into like what the minimum length would be for the kitchen.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's definitely, so if you were really designing this kitchen during the CD phase of a project, you would get into that sort of thing. So you might, if you put a dishwasher, let's say, on the end of a row of cabinets, what you need an end panel to cover the side of that dishwasher, which is usually an inch. So you might add an inch to this dimension here. You might have some fillers depending on if the kitchen is going in between 2 walls, for example. So you might want to leave 11'8", for example. Those are detailed requirements. I would say in this question we're talking about I literally just took pencil and paper out. I'm trying to sketch out how big my kitchen's going to be, and should I use 11 feet, 11 and a half feet, or 12 feet. That's the kind of thing that we're doing now. We're going to finesse this much more later as we go through the design process.
Perfect, thanks. And then I'm gonna roll to question number 4 too. We have a question around the light gauge steel.
Yeah.
So that question is, does light gauge steel framing have similar limitations as would a stick-built wood structure?
We actually do not use light gauge steel very much where I practice in New York. So I'm not terribly familiar with it. My understanding is that it can span a little bit further than light wood frame construction, but I would have to double check that to give a definitive answer. I think it's more common in commercial buildings and particularly in more southern and western parts of the country, but just not a lot of experience with it. That said, I do think it can span a little further than wood frame.
Perfect, thanks. And then also, let's see, we have one more from Sarah on question number 4, and it's, shouldn't we consider cast in place concrete as a time consuming process for a school?
I think if the question was saying that you needed to do this quickly because, I don't know, the start of the school semester was coming and it's already June, then you might want to consider that. But because it takes a little while to cure, but I don't know that structural steel framing is like significantly faster when you've got a whole variety of different spaces and an irregular column grid. You've also got lead time to manufacture the steel. So I think that in practice is probably a good thing to bring up with the client and CM if you're working with the CM, just to make sure that what you're proposing works with the project schedule. I would say that for this question, we're not, there's no consideration of that, so I wouldn't bring that to the table. And that's something that's really hard to do when you're taking the ARE, and I totally get that. As architects, we're presented a situation and we're probably supposed to ask 5 or 10 more questions to get more information about it in real life. But we can't do that on the ARE. We just need to answer the question based on what it says and try not to bring too much additional information to it. So with that said, I wouldn't be considering time for this particular question.
Great, thanks, Chris. And then I'm gonna roll back to question number 1. Sherry is just trying to see what the answer is for this one. So for question number 1, it's gonna be the north property line. And later today too, we're also gonna post an edited version of this ARE Live on YouTube, and also you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts or a Spotify podcast too. So if you're looking for like the in-depth explanation, you can watch that on our YouTube later today too, and you'll receive an email with the link to watch it there too. But Chris, yeah, go ahead.
I'll say one last thing about this question.
Cool.
I went through and sort of did the math on each of these property lines. If you were taking this question, the exam, and you got this question, you could really quickly just see that there's 5 contour lines that go through the north property line, and that's going to mean that it has the most total slope. If I said that, I wouldn't have explained nearly as much as I did and would have been a little boring. So I didn't go that route. But sometimes people ask, well, how can I answer these questions a lot faster than you do on ARE Live? And that's one way you can do it here. Just simply the north property line has 5 lines going through it. You can see that, and therefore it's the steepest.
I mean, that helps you break it down into like 15 seconds. That's perfect. Thanks.
There you go.
Sweet. I think that's all the questions that we have right now. Chris, I just want to say, as always, thank you for hosting. It's been a pleasure working with you today. And as always, thank you for helping support the architecture community.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. If you're joining us for the first time, Black Spectacles is the leader in ARE prep. We work with learning scientists and architects to ensure you're studying the right content and that you retain it so you can pass on the first try. Our next ARE Live will be on July 23rd, where we'll be covering a PJM mock exam. You can go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to sign up, or check out our community page for this episode. This is pinned right at the top of our thread for ARE Live PPD mock exam, June 2025. You can find the link to sign up for this next episode, and you'll also receive an email later to sign up for it too. Over on our Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, we post mock exam questions daily. So if you don't already follow us, I'd suggest that you do. We're at black.spectacles on Instagram and TikTok, and just Black Spectacles on Facebook. We offer a firm referral program for firms and schools where if you introduce us to your boss or HR, and if they sign up, we'll give you a $250 gift card of your choice. To participate, follow the instructions on blackspectacles.com/group-referral. And we also offer a refer a friend program where you can sign up to receive a customized discount code to save your friend 15% off any membership and receive a $50 gift card of your choice when they redeem. You can go to blackspectacles.com/referral to participate. And I want to say congratulations to S. Derek and Emily. You posted in our community today and you just won a free Black Spectacles t-shirt. I'll reach out to you via email to get your size and shipping information, and I'll be in touch soon. And just a reminder, if you'd like to be eligible to win a free t-shirt, post a question you have about our featured topic in our community during our next AREE Live. And our community is always active, not just during AREE Live. So poke around and see what your peers are up to and asking about. In fact, we just launched a new podcast called Licensure Stories, which you can find on our AREE community YouTube channel and your favorite podcasting service, where our founder interviews recently licensed architects to learn about their struggles and successes to learn how they did it. Check out Licensure Stories on our AREE community or YouTube channel. And as a thank you for coming, we'd like to offer you a 20% discount on any membership with the discount automatically applied at checkout. And this is going to be valid until June 30th of 2025. This is available for all new memberships and also upgraded memberships too. So let's say you're on our premium subscription, you can take advantage of this 20% discount and apply that to a pro or expert membership. Or you can also go from a monthly to an annual and save 20% on that too. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to our customer service chat in the bottom right corner, but you can go to blackspectacles.com/pricing to take advantage of this offer. And finally, be sure to take our survey, which you'll find in your email after this episode, and share any suggestions you may have. I promise we read every word that you write and we use them to tune our next episodes. Thanks for tuning in.